Hold on to your butts.
We are changing the course of history as we see it. That is what Wesley demands.
Now this affects Iris. Iris, where are you?
What you feel only matters to you. I do not entertain hypotheticals. The world as it is vexing enough.
Iris, I have a tip for you.
Don't take drugs!
Or Whatever Movies with Wesley and Iris.
What up, and welcome to Or Whatever Movies. I'm your co-host, Iris, and I am here with my older brother,
Wesley.
Today, we are talking a film from 2021, an Apple original.
CODA, Unnecessary Distinction. Apparently, there was a movie from 2020 starring Katie Holmes and Patrick Stewart, also called CODA, about playing the piano.
And did that refer to like a musical phrase called a coda?
Uh-huh, as does this, in a way.
Not an acronym kind of coda?
But I think it plays both ways this way, right?
Well, it's definitely all caps, so it's an acronym. But how does it play in the conclusion kind of way?
I don't know. They had the Monkey Trouble style running for the hug under sweeping music.
They're definitely going for the feels, but I'm going to say
Definitely.
But I'll say at the top, I felt the feels.
Yeah, you cried. Kelly Ray was crying. She tried to hide it.
I cried several times.
Man.
First movie in a long time where I cried.
I feel like this was the exact opposite. Same thematically, but just like a twisted multiverse inversion of Sound of Metal. There were musical montages and there were specifically funny moments, and it still made me feel more feels than last year's Sound of Metal.
Do you still wonder if hearing is bad?
I don't think hearing is bad. That said, it was just the defensive position of the brother who was jealous of her sister for being the hearing child, and the parents not understanding. What, if we were blind, would you want to be a painter? Why would you want to sing? There were tropes set up. It was the resistance and the stakes that seemed a little bit manufactured. But I think that on the whole, it was a much more joyous experience, and the family connection, the family was brought together, ironically, by her branching out, leaving home, or doing the things that maybe weren't as inclusive for her family as she would have wanted them to be.
She made the hard decision to stay, and I think needed the family's encouragement to go. And then when they were united in that, she had the freedom and the release to do it with their blessing.
Yep.
So right at the top, they're on this Forrest Gump-style fishing boat, a troller.
Yeah. And
she's singing her little heart out, and they're minding their business. I didn't know what this movie was about, so I'm just going in super fresh.
But you knew what CODA stood for
No.
going in, right?
I knew what it stood for, but I didn't apply the meaning to this film. I didn't know that this film was about a child or children of deaf adults. I really went in totally blind to this film. And so she's singing her little heart out, and they're minding their business. And I'm like, she's got a nice voice and all, but that must get annoying for them after a while. And it was such a great setup because you get her love of it. You get her isolation. You get the family dynamic. And it's this wonderful look into this seafaring world and this family's business, which apparently is generational. And all that jazz. Like, what a great little setup, don't you think?
Yes, although it was conveniently set up. I thought, does her singing, is her ability to sing, is it relevant? Where are we going with this? And then I thought I understood, it's Mr. Holland's opus, basically. The miscommunication between the deaf people and the people who can sing and who love music. And for a minute, I thought it was going to be kind of a deaf musical where she's singing and then they notice and then they fall into like a synchronized dance with her. And they do all these musical numbers and use creative sign language and stuff as choreography.
Interpretive dance. That's where you thought this was going?
Well,
the 3-time Oscar-nominated CODA, you thought that's where this was going?
Not really, but the 3-time Oscar-nominated CODA, I thought was going to have recurring themes, a strong through line of, And so I was like, okay, how is this fishing relevant and her ability to sing?
But it was all relevant. When you look back, it all makes sense, doesn't it?
Yes, but they're deaf fishermen or whatever, and they've gone generations of fishing exactly the way they need to. Has the Coast Guard only rolled up on them when their hearing daughter is not on the boat? Like that was the only time, and they had no safeguards in place, no flashing lights, nothing like that?
No, the spy ratted them out. The spy radioed the Coast Guard to come and do a check.
That's a bummer.
Yeah, dude. I mean, if that's not the case, that's at least what the family believed, that they were set up, that the inspector was kind of blindsided by the fact that they were deaf, called them in violation, and then let the Coast Guard do the dirty work.
Even her reaction was slightly disproportionate. Oh, sorry, I wasn't aware you weren't hearing. Let's proceed as best we can, communicating in whatever way is necessary. Perhaps I'll text you, something like that. I wondered if this is the more obvious reaction because as, forgive me, disabilities go, or impairments go, hearing impairments, deafness is in a strange place because it's not outwardly repulsive or bad. And yet in this movie, some people, like the inspector, definitely had a negative reaction. Oh, you're deaf? Well, that's bad. And that has never been the case for us because we've grown up with hearing impairments with our parents and stuff. But I wondered if this movie was playing up the drawbacks of deafness because that seemed pretty mean. It seemed less understanding and more cruel. And definitely they got teased. I will grant kids are terrible people until they learn to be not so terrible. And so I can understand if she talked funny, having learned from her deaf parents. Thankfully, they didn't do that impression of deaf speak.
Yeah, she declined, probably very tactfully from a holistic movie perspective.
Right. But still, kids are terrible and they will tease you and stuff. But it seemed like this movie was positioning itself to be society at large, looking down on deaf people as a social disability as much as it is just a physical thing. Does that make sense? It was like deaf people are bad. And I never found that to be the case in life.
Yeah, I wonder if xenophobia, the definition of xenophobia is broad enough to incorporate disabilities. Like I know it's fear of the unknown or fear of the different, right? And does it include fear of disability? Because it seemed like any repulsion or rejection was a result of fear or not understanding how to interact with, a deaf person. And that was a theme that they did visit in some ways. Like when Leo and Ruby have it out at Leo's hiding spot or thinking spot.
By the water, yeah.
Yeah, he had his water spot and she had her cliff spot where apparently they went to think respectively. When they had it out at his little spot and he's like, he plants the seed at the dinner. He's like, oh, Saint Ruby coming to the rescue. And then her parents defend her and they're like, she's trying to help the family. And then later he's like, I'm a man. I can do this. You're afraid. Your part in this, Ruby, is that you're afraid and embarrassed for us to look stupid. And you're actually caretaking for the other people. You're caretaking for the public because you don't want them to be afraid of dealing with us. Well, maybe the public needs to grow up and learn how to deal with us as much as we need to learn how to deal with them. It takes two. All I'm saying is that I think they touch on this theme of isolating themselves, but also the other part is the wider public's lack of desire to engage.
Yeah. While we're on the brother, as Ruby's friend clearly was, so I wondered because he was very expressive and emotive. And I wonder if anybody, I don't say I do, but does anybody have a gauge of how expressive and emotive and gesticulative sign language is? And does that make for good acting? Do you act differently in sign language than you do, as if you're on stage, everything has to be heightened and you have to speak in a, or affect an accent or whatever.
Yeah.
Would they subtitle non-ASL sign language movies for us?
I always look at interpreters as performers because they don't just speak with their hands, they speak with their whole body, they speak with their face. They're very emotive. And that's kind of my baseline for good sign language. Leo didn't feel overacty to me. He did feel passionate. And it was really fun to see siblings shit-talking each other in sign language.
And in dirty sign language. They were swearing and stuff, which they took a lot of joy in.
And so it was fun to see. I didn't feel like they were overacting in any way.
Daniel Durant, who is the brother character of Leo, this is not a slight on his acting ability. He was passionate and you could see all of it coming through, his frustration. He's making facial expressions while he's signing and he was very emotive, whereas Troy Kotzer, who played Frank the dad, was less so. He was more understated. Obviously, all of these performers are actually deaf, but I was wondering how you differentiate and distinguish, determine good acting for non-hearing people, because Troy Kotzer is the sole Oscar nominee, which I think is a little bit unfair it was kind of him just steely gazed or kind of tearful gazed, and it was really just kind of more beard forward acting. Like he already had to surmount the obstacle of being creepy looking, and how do we make dad go from creepy looking to understanding and loving and emotional?
Which he definitely was.
And I wondered what the gauge was, because Marlee Matlin, of course, is an Oscar winner for Children of Lesser God 1987. I thought that Daniel Durant did a good job as the brother. Ruby, Emilia Jones, was a real standout, which we can get into. But Troy, the sole Oscar nominee, and I wondered why you thought that was.
I wonder if it's related to the ending. What did you compare it to when she comes running out of the car?
To Monkey Trouble. They think they have to say goodbye forever, and then there's the running, like musical slow motion running last hug, teary hug. Like I watched Monkey Trouble 1,000 years ago, and that movie was so dumb, but then the stupid monkey running back at the end to hug her, spoiler, made me cry.
Which is what I also was trying to channel in my film Smokey, which I think we've referenced in other reviews, where the girl and the dog reunite after their horrendous night together. And there's just something about it. So in the Monkey Trouble end, where she comes running back to the family, they do a group hug. She has a moment with her brother and her mom, and then a longer moment with her dad. And I was like, okay, this story was about father and daughter. They had that nice little moment on the bed of the pickup truck. You know, she's out there on the boat with him. I think they were trying to underscore that was the main relationship. And so in that sense, Troy is the main supporting character. And I thought had a really touching moment on the back of the truck.
That was the one that made Kelly Ray cry for sure.
And that's when I expected her to sign and sing. They saved that for the audition.
Yeah, I was like mad. Why wouldn't you? Why aren't you signing to him when they're on the bed of the truck? And then I was like, oh, that's why.
Because they want to save it for the end. But it was also more personal, more intimate for him to hold her, touch her. You know, of course, they're actors, but they're playing a family. And I completely 100% believed her when she let him touch her face like it was the most normal thing in the world.
Yep, and her throat.
And her throat, which is normally very uncomfortable for me, but was very touching for me to see. And so I bought it. But I believed them in that moment. And I think that's what put Troy Kotzer's performance over the edge.
I mean, I do think that this movie had a lot of great things going for it. Yes, it was emotional. Yes, it rang true without trying to be pretentious. But in a way, it was very formulaic and kind of structured, a little bit obvious in places once I understood where we were going. It had a weird magic that was true within that distinctly artificial framework. I'm not sure that people are like, this was the most realistic depiction. Maybe a lot of it was true, and it certainly felt, as you've said, filial and familiar and genuine. And so it threw me a little bit off guard. Like I was like the Jeff Goldblum style music teacher. I was like, this dude cannot be the comic relief. I was really afraid he was going to pop up and be like, what is this sign language? This is fascinating. Teach me more about it. And he was going to orchestrate the thing. It was so obvious.
Didn't he do that when he said nice to fuck you? I mean, wasn't that essentially what you were fearing?
Exactly. It's completely obvious that was going to happen, right? And it played for comic effect, and there was a lot of that in there, but it did feel like the best type of comedy that had a real heart and a real basis. It's just thematically, it felt like a different kind of movie than its Oscar contention would suggest. I don't know. It's not a bad thing.
Rolling Stone summed it up pretty well. They said CODA is every single Sundance movie rolled into one.
Nice.
And I think that's getting at I think they're picking up what you're putting down, because it was distinctly indie, distinctly romantic comedy, family drama, like all of that stuff that we know and we understand, but with this twist with sign language and the music.
You know what it reminded me of in a weird way that no one will ever make this comparison was The Help. The Help had very serious themes, but it played so light and funny and familiar that this was just like a feel-good version of Sound of Metal or Mr. Holland's Opus, which was even strangely more serious.
I hear what you're saying, and I think it's interesting that you're coming at this from a public kind of perspective, right? We're talking about how CODA is perceived by a general audience, but I think it's worth exploring our very specific approach to CODA as COHIA. Children of Hearing-Impaired Adult.
COHIA. Did you just make that up?
I just made it up. Children of a Hearing-Impaired Adult, which we are, which we've mentioned in previous reviews, right? Our mom is hearing impaired. Her family thought that she was dumb, as they called it back in the day. And then later on, they found that she was near deaf, and they put her into schools for the deaf and hearing impaired. And she grew up like that until she went to high school.
Which mom is super emotional about, by the way.
That they misdiagnosed her for so long.
Yeah, that they thought she was dumb and it wasn't her fault.
Yeah, imagine that. I mean, to think, oh, she's just dumb, when in actuality, she wasn't getting the type of education she needed, had all of her mental faculties. And then she matriculated to Hollywood High School, of which she's super proud, and graduated from Hollywood High, got an associate, I think, had a career, had a family, had a quote-unquote normal life. And then all of the effects that had on us as kids. I mean, I related to Ruby in very, very personal, specific ways. Like, I have vivid memories of Mom being on the phone and being like, talk to them. And I'd get on the phone.
Vivid memories like from childhood? I still get that.
Of course, except thanks to text and email, she's got a lot of other alternatives to the phone. But as a kid, it's a different experience, right? As an adult, you're capable. As an adult, you're mature. But as a kid, it's not abusive and it's not damaging, but it's an unfair burden to put on a kid to caretake for your parent. Your parent is supposed to be there to take care of you. When you have to caretake for your parent, it's an unusual burden that has all kinds of downstream effects.
Undoubtedly, it's a heavy responsibility in Ruby's case to be the sole family translator. Mom had the two of us and she had Dad. You know, Dad didn't suffer any hearing impairment until he was much older. And I remember that stuff too. And at the same time, it came so naturally to me. I felt several times in sort of the hammier aspects of this movie that it was as if they had only been deaf for a week. When he looked to her, like to translate what was happening during the fishing board meeting.
Which was so reminiscent of Jaws. Do all fishermen have like contentious group community meetings like that?
Yeah. Apparently fishing is super competitive and all this stuff. And fine, look, I get it. It's a tough trade and you get stiffed on prices because you're just a supplier or whatever. Anyway, I yelled at the TV. I was like, Ruby, get up. It's obvious. This is what you're going to have to do. This is your role. You're the translator. And I feel like we did do that automatically. I always positioned myself in such a way when Mom would talk to people that she could see me and I would be in between so that I could communicate to other people and Mom could see that satisfactorily. It didn't make sense to me a lot of the time that she didn't understand her role. I get that she was a teenager and she was starting to look in her own directions and apart from her family. Undoubtedly, that was hard for the family, but I thought that sometimes she made it difficult by deliberately not bridging that gap between her non-hearing parents and the rest of the hearing world.
But obviously a very strong character. And as soon as she employs her strength toward her own future, she starts making traction real quick toward the guy that she wants and the career that she wants and the passions she wants to pursue.
It was both her blessing and her curse when she said, I've never done anything without my family. She has that family connection and everybody loves each other and they're one big happy family and that's amazing. But at the same time, she was almost incapable of doing anything else. Down to the kind of hammy, like, refusal to understand or to commit in that weird throat singing versus, full body singing, belly singing or whatever. It's kind of a little bit frustrating. But tying it back to us being kids of hearing impaired adults, we lived our own lives being able people in all respects with hearing, liked music and all that stuff. I wondered if it was a little bit over the top for none of them to understand that she loves music. I mean, they seemed like pretty hip, pretty with it parents for their age. And they were like, what? You love music? How could you love music? I mean, we were setting up the stakes to knock them down later, but it didn't ring true to me that they would not understand that she would follow something that they were kind of left out of.
And I wonder how much of that is our own experience, right? Because despite our mom's hearing impairment, she loved music.
Yeah.
But she would listen to music and she would feel it. And she would belt out in a tone-deaf kind of way. But I loved it because I knew she enjoyed it. And similarly, Dad has his groove. And so in a house with hearing impairment, right, we had a lot of music. It's not like we had it on all the time. It's not like my girls who have Alexa and Paloma, who requests songs on Spotify in the car constantly. Like, it wasn't like that. But anyway, we grew up in a home full of music, and so the idea that Ruby's parents could not understand it is probably a little foreign to us. But man, was that scene powerful when they're in the concert and you're waiting to hear the result of all the work that she and Homeboy have done for their duet, and then they cut out the sound and Mom and Dad are smiling politely and looking around, and I felt like that was the first time I ever really thought about what it would have been like for Mom when I took her places, or I brought her to church to hear me play guitar and sing, or I took her to the VeggieTales movie where she had no subtitles and probably couldn't understand a single thing.
Did you ugly cry?
I full on cried.
The Sound of Metal stuff, where they did that a lot, where we get his hearing perspective, muffled bass and thumps and things like that, like the dad was enjoying the rap. They used that device quite a lot. And I thought, okay, we're just not doing that in this movie. This is a movie for hearing people to understand maybe a little bit about the deaf community, and then they dropped out the sound. And I thought, okay, I guess we're doing that. And it felt like a gimmick until you realized that for this movie, it only happened a couple of times, and it was impactful, surprisingly impactful in that way, where it becomes immediately uncomfortable. I imagined watching this in the theater, and whenever it happens, you suddenly become aware again that you're in a theater and surrounded by people, and you're just like, just bring it back. Just bring it back. We're in a movie. And doing that level of discomfort and frankly kind of boredom where you're taken out of the experience is exactly what the family was experiencing. They understood what was happening, but they were still like, what are you going to do for dinner? Because I like, do I have to go to the store? And they wanted to be there to support, but there was nothing to carry them, and they checked out. And that's a completely valid response that, yeah, it wasn't meant to be like tear inducing. It's impactful, but at the same time for them, it's routine. And it just, everyone is staring raptly and they're looking around at all the people who are nodding their heads and
wiping their tears.
Yeah. And they're like, okay. They're just removed. I think this movie hit a lot of the right notes and kind of a lot of the wrong notes also. Marlee Matlin, who played the mom, said the hardest line for her to deliver was the line about, if we were blind, would you want to be a painter? Why would you want to sing? Obviously the implication being we can't hear it, so why would you want to do that? Because it didn't ring true to her as a non-hearing person. And I think that was a convention that was set up to make this movie, more broadly appealing to more people. But I do not believe that was the genuine sentiment of a family, regardless of whether or not they understood it. I think it was more that they were on the defensive and that they were afraid of having their built-in interpreter leave. There was a weird built-in codependency on her part as well, where she felt she needed them for certain things. So it was a coming-of-age tale in that way, with a lot of markers in place, a lot of tropes that helped it to get there, some more effective than others. But what I want to talk about is the acting stuff.
Starting with Emilia Jones.
So Emilia Jones, I'm continually surprised when people do a flawless American accent when they're clearly British in interviews. It almost is like they're faking their accent in interviews. Because it's like, oh, that's obviously an American teenager. Totally, dude, right? She'd never hit a false note. And then I found that none of them knew how to fish. The dad, Troy Kotzer, was like, I had to go and learn how to fish. And there was like fish guts. And I'm like, man, I guess I'm going to have to do that for this movie. They all had to learn how to fish. Emilia Jones had never taken a singing lesson in her life, knew nothing about ASL, intensely trained for like 9 months on those things, and then had to act in an American accent and sing and sign at the same time.
And have bomb-ass Gen Z eyebrows.
Okay, didn't even note the eyebrows. She was just a ponytail kid from Fishertown or whatever. But
and she had to fish. That's incredible.
Yeah. No, they all had to learn all that stuff. And that's why I was wondering if anybody was going to be nominated for act. Look, do you only get what you get on screen, or is it part of the process as well? Do you need behind the scenes glimpses in order to gauge what is a better acting job than another? Because in terms of commitment, preparation, training, practice, and execution, she had all of those things that made me think, who is this girl? That's pretty wild that she was able to do this and I don't know her name or anything else that she's done. She talked about the scene during the Berkeley audition. The signing had to be perfect. And if it wasn't, if she did 7 takes singing that song, if there was only 1 take where the signing was perfect, that was the take they had to use. Like, that's a really tough road. I think the movie is a type that maybe suffers a little bit in the realism department because of how used we are to this kind of movie. I keep wanting to say comedy, but just kind of lighter, family-friendly fare. But it seems like this was a hardcore, ultra-rehearsed indie art house drama kind of under the surface.
Yeah, high-end indie art house drama comedy that was still bootstrapped. I mean, under $10 million, right? And sold in a bidding war at Sundance. Kind of a weird class of film that doesn't really exist these days. I didn't know about all of her training and preparation. It does make me feel like she was snubbed a little bit. So, hats off to Emilia Jones for sure. It sounded like she was surrounded by a very accomplished cast of actors who also happened to be deaf, all by a writer-director who apparently curated this film with lots of love and care over a long period of time.
This is still a certain kind of movie that just is a little bit better than other movies of that type.
I think this movie is anomalous in the sense that it's hard to pin down what the star is. What's the key driver here? Is it the relatively unknown cast? Is it the formulaic yet heartwarming storyline and structure? Was it the coming-of-age story that just had a slightly different twist on it? Like, who or what is the star of this film?
It was a music/fishing movie. It was a clash of music culture and fisher culture, which they did in a single montage.
Regardless of my very personal connection to Ruby Rossi's experience, CODA, as a Kohia, really worked for me. I mean, I'd give this a totally. I'll give it a totally on your behalf.
Okay, I'm not going to go that far. They played it funny or whatever, and it was light and inconsequential, as was the faux tension between her and the music teacher. It was like encouraging Whiplash, where he was all driven, but there were no stakes. She's supposed to, when he gives her the ultimatum that she has to show up and commit and respect his time, and then she can't because she's going through real drama with her family that she can't get out of. When she goes to him all downcast and he's judging her for not living up to her commitments, tell him what happened.
Well,
it was unavoidable. You have to understand, this is the unique situation of my family. It's not a reflection of my commitment to your music.
That's still an excuse. And it was very effective narratively to portray the impossibility of her situation. But it's still an excuse. Like, if you're going to make the decisions to succeed in the ways that you want to succeed, then realignment of expectations with the other people and things in your life, like, that's necessary. I don't know. I'm kind of siding with the instructor on that one.
I'm just saying, it was a little bit backwards from some of the stuff we experienced, but easily forgivable. Like, it was really hard when she was like, I prayed that you were deaf when you were born. It's like, ouch. Because isn't this clear evidence that I don't think that hearing is bad? Because I told Kelly the first thing that I, as the first child, experienced, the first thing that Mom did is snap her fingers next to my ear and see if I would flinch. And then she was all happy when I could hear it. CODA was a good movie. It was sweet if it was a little bit surfacey. There were a lot of really deep themes that I don't think they really plumbed for dramatic effect, but they did for emotional effect. I feel like it hit a lot of nerves and it made me sad and happy and joyous and all that stuff, which I think is what it was aiming for. I don't think this is a movie with pretensions. I think it was meant to be sort of fun and also a little bit eye-opening because we come to care for this family. I'm going to give this an all right, but it's a very good, very high, nothing wrong with this movie, kind of all right. And largely that comes from the acting, in particular from Emilia Jones. Marley Mann was great. The family was great. Good luck, Troy Kotsur. I hope that this, nomination comes through for you because it didn't for What's His Nuts in Sound of Metal.
All right. I finally got it out of you. An all right from Wes, a good from Iris. This is our discussion on Apple TV Plus's 3-time Academy Award nominated CODA. CODA worked for me, and we'd love to know if it worked for you. 818-835-0473 is our phone number. orwhatevermovies@gmail.com, @orwhatevermovies on Instagram and Twitter. Please subscribe to our podcast. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.